Okay, now my hands are muddy, but I kept the camera dry. We are in the mud tunnels in the third level of the Osiris Shaft. Alright, today we're going into the Osiris Shaft. The Osiris Shaft is one of the most important subterranean structures on the Giza Plateau. It consists of 3 vertical shafts leading down to 3 consecutive chambers. It's located beneath what's called the Sphinx Causeway, running from the Sphinx to the Middle Pyramid, also known as the Khafre Causeway. Its position is almost exactly in the center of the entire Giza Plateau, and it's also the deepest accessible location at Giza. Its deepest chamber is over 100 feet down, which is at least 10 feet lower than the subterranean chamber of the Great Pyramid. I've covered several different aspects of the Osiris Shaft mystery in previous films, but today I'm going much, much further and deeper than anyone has ever gone before. Literally and figuratively. I'm going to share my original footage of spaces that have never ever been filmed before. Spaces that have never been entered by any human being on record besides myself. And some of this also covers the deepest footage or photographic evidence ever recorded at the Giza Plateau, down to 120 feet or deeper below the surface. So there's a few records that are going to be broken with this video. And then after that, I'm going to go through the discoveries and the analysis of the footage and share some of the very exciting leads that could actually give us a path towards further chambers that are connected through the Osiris Shaft. So these could lead to actual potential projects, and there are many different ways in which we could investigate these leads without causing any damage to the structure, simply by removing sand, essentially. Even being as concise as I possibly can, I know it's going to be a long video, but I can promise it will be worth it. I believe these discoveries deserve to be set in the proper context so that you can really understand how important this subject is. But as usual, I'll begin with some useful context. The Osiris Shaft is off limits to tourists and only accessible by private visit. The price may vary slightly depending on who books it, but it will not be less than $2,000 for up to a 2-hour visit. For this reason, it's usually only visited by tour groups, which I've done before, but I also wanted to record the chambers without people in them. So on a separate trip, I arranged a private visit myself, paying full price. I wasn't just after footage, but I also wanted to create a 3D virtual photogrammetric model of the whole complex so that it could be studied remotely by anyone. I invited my friend Matthew, who has worked on many archaeological photogrammetry projects in the past, to help me film with our 360-degree cameras. And I also decided to invite Armando May, who'd been working with the Khafre project and wanted to study more of the underground at Giza. This could be the shaft we're seeing just on the west of the Osiris Shaft. Yeah. I got Armando May here with me today. We're gonna check it out. It's all full of sand. This is the entrance to the Osiris Shaft, where you can see on the causeway how thick the causeway stones are and how many courses are there. What do you think, Armando? Are you ready?
Yeah.
Time for the Osiris Shaft? Yes. Make a little video, yeah.
I was giving a look at the causeway.
Yeah.
And the blocks that were used to build the causeway. That seems to be very massive. And moreover, is clear the clues of water erosion that are very, very impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, and how many courses thick are there? There's just one layer or more. We know there used to be a layer on top too, like a casing, a leveled stone level. So this layer we're seeing is actually it's the second layer down.
Yeah.
And that's why you see along the top there's some very long stones, which would indicate being a ceiling of a tunnel.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah. These
It's
are
fantastic.
maybe 7 feet tall, these thick blocks. So how many courses down does that go? Is it a wall going down around it? I think everything we're finding is indicating a tunnel straight from the Sphinx
Yeah.
to the Khafre Pyramid, and splitting off between to the Great Pyramid and Menkaure as well. There was an official report that came out on the Osiris Shaft from Zahi Hawass in a book called The Archaeology and Art of Ancient Egypt, which was published in 2007, about 8 years after Zahi went in and excavated. So we can get an overview here. This image shows us the three levels and the three descending shafts. However, some people consider it to be 4 levels because at the top there's actually a tunnel that comes in to the opening of the first shaft. And that could be considered level 0, which is this one. You walk in from the south, come up, and then you come to the shaft that descends down to what we call the first level. The shaft drops down here and comes out to a small chamber that just has another shaft in the far end of it. And if you descend that shaft, you come down to what we call the second level, where you end up in this chamber here, and you walk into the chamber with 7 additional small chambers around it, some of which had sarcophagi in them. And to the right, there is another chamber that has the third shaft going down, which goes to what we call the third level. On the third level, you have a sarcophagus in the middle of an island surrounded by water, and the sarcophagus lid was found just at the base of the shaft where the ladder comes down. So the water is a very important part of this structure, and you can see here that the water is in a moat around the island on the bottom of the third level. The water level of the Osiris Shaft that creates this central island is at about 33 meters below the ground level. This is very similar to the Osirion Abydos, and there you can see from this side view and above view, this is where the water is. You also have a moat that's running around a central island. And at the Osirion, you also have a large square cut out in the middle for a sarcophagus. And this water is over 22 meters deep. I have literally asked the guard on site who would know better than anyone, and that's what he told me. So 22 meters deep would actually look something like this, taking the scale of meters over here. And that basically means that the temple is just about as deep as it is long, at least. It may be even deeper. This is very important because oftentimes people will say there can't be any constructions under the Giza Plateau because it's all underwater. However, at the Osirion, we see absolute proof that the Egyptians were capable of actually constructing temples up to 22 meters below the water table. So how did they do that? We don't know. But we know that the Osirion and the Osiris Shaft both share this kind of motif of having this central island within a moat of water around it. You can see at the Osirion there is the moat coming around the sides here, and you can see that it also has a central rectangular hole in the ground for a sarcophagus or a ritual box that was used. You can also see the plank coming across that now serves as a bridge from the incoming tunnel. Of course, that plank was not there in ancient times when you would have had to walk in through the tunnel and then drop into the water and swim over, and then you could walk up these steps onto the main island. Those are the steps right here. So you can see that you'd have to basically be fully immersed in the water and then walk up these steps. Why? Because that was part of the ritual. In fact, it's the original ritual that became the baptism of Christianity. You had to go through the water to be reborn, like Osiris. So when you cross through that water, you are actually changed by it. The water is charged with this energy of the temple, and when you submerge yourself into it, you come back up as a different person. So this is why modern Christians will say they are born again when they are baptized, because it's the original Osirian resurrection initiation. And that's what the ritual is. And this could be carried out either at the Osiris Shaft or at the Osirion. We also know that the Osirion is likely much, much older than any of the dynastic temples in Upper Egypt. It has architectural features that are reminiscent of the Sphinx Temple or the Valley Temple at Giza, which we know go back to the original age of the Sphinx because they were built using blocks that were pulled from the Sphinx's body as it was carved down into the ground. These massive blocks we see at the Osirian, flat with no hieroglyphs, and perfect, smooth 90-degree angles. These are also some of the largest blocks ever used in all of Egypt. And that's similar to the Sphinx temples as well. Here you can see me standing next to one of these massive columns. And here you can see the extreme precision of the stonework. And if you look closely, you can also see all of the flower of life images down here. I was talking to Manu Safes today about some of the cosmology related to these sites, and he mentioned some interesting points. So this water that's associated with Osiris and his tomb is known as Nadit, and it's also called Wort at Edfu. It's where Set killed Osiris, and it's also where the recreation of the world happens when Ptah utters the written words of creation. So the Osiris Shaft and the Osirian are really kind of centers for the resurrecting of the world from its prior cycle. It's the symbolic center of creation of the world after its destruction. And so it very well could be associated with the Hall of Records, because this is something that was intended to be preserved from the prior world and brought into the new one. And it's also sometimes associated with these written words of creation that Ptah is uttering. At Esna, it says that Osiris was entombed with the creation words, and this could make it a candidate for the Hall of Records. Manu also mentioned that the sarcophagus on the island is conceptually similar to the Abaton grave of Osiris on Biga Island in Aswan, the secret cavern where Osiris is buried. The Osiris Shaft has the same mythology, and it may well be the original grave and not just symbolic. This is mentioned in what's called the Abaton Decree, which is an inscription on an archway called Hadrian's Portal at the Philae Temple. And on the same wall, there's a rare relief of Osiris inside a snake-like cavern, which is a legendary secret. It's never been discovered. Biga Island, by the way, is just next to Philae Island. So on the original island, there was a tomb of Osiris. The coiled snake which guards Osiris is Mihen, which is also the name of an ancient Egyptian board game with a coiled snake wrapped up in a spiral. The Roads of Mihen is the name given to the 9 bands around Ra in the vignette of Ra. This is an image that Manu brought attention to in his book Under the Sphinx and suggests could be at least a suggestion of the Egyptians' understanding of the heliocentric theory. In 2015, they also announced the discovery of a very similar structure in Thebes. This is at the west bank of Luxor. They found another structure that looks very much like the Osiris Shaft and seemed to have a very similar function. There were even photographs that showed again there is a rectangular hole in the center of the complex for a sarcophagus or a ceremonial box that was used in the rituals. So these are views of the tomb of Osiris in Luxor. This is a separate structure. So we know that in the mythology, Set slays Osiris and then cuts his body into 14 pieces, which are each taken to different temples all throughout the Kingdom of Egypt. So each one of these body parts were taken to different locations. That's why we have multiple tombs of Osiris. It was thought that the Osiris Shaft at Giza was actually the resting place of his heart. In the Osiris Shaft, you also have 4 pillars that are placed on the 4 corners of the island, and these are carved out of the bedrock. This is very similar to a cave temple in India called Kedareshwar. This temple is completely hewn from the bedrock and includes 4 pillars in the center around a central Shiva lingam. The whole floor is flooded with water, and you can even notice some similar architectural styles in the lip cut around the door that you see coming off one side of this chamber. And it's very interesting that this temple has a legend going with it, saying that when each one of these 4 pillars breaks, it means it's the end of a yuga, And when the fourth and final pillar that's still standing is broken, it will mean the Kali Yuga is finally over. In other words, the Dark Ages have passed and we're moving back towards a new Golden Age, or Satya Yuga, which means the Age of Truth. So you also notice the perfectly flat walls and 90-degree corners and inset carvings like this. This is very curious that it has the exact same layout as the Osiris Shaft, and I do believe there could be some similarities or some common roots between even these temples in India. So this might also remind us of Vishnu, the preserver. In Hinduism, you have Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. Vishnu arises from this mound in a lotus in the primordial waters. And these waters in all of these, globally represents in these origin myths this the consciousness or the energetic unmanifest state of the universe. So the primordial waters are thought to be this fluid substance that remains in existence when the entire universe goes into a reconstruction. This water is also very similar to what we call in alchemy the prima materia, or the first substance, the primary substance. So this is kind of like amniotic fluid almost, in which the universe kind of gestates before it's birthed into physical reality. So this water is incredibly sacred, and it's actually a huge honor to be able to touch it or actually step into it. There have been attempts to analyze the water in the Osiris Shaft as well as the water at the Osirion. And on the Aceto website, they have a great page that has tons of resources about the Osirion, at least specifically, including some of the water analysis there. There's also an amazing article on that page from my friend Charlie Hertzer, who has done a lot of research into Osiris and the mythology around him. He's actually one of the only people to do a full translation of what's called the Book of Gates, which is a rare underworld text that's very little known. And one of the most complete forms of that text was actually discovered on the sarcophagus of Seti I, who's attributed as the builder of the Abydos Temple, where the Osirian is. It's kind of interesting that Seti I is the man who built the Osiris Temple, which has the Osirian behind it, because he took for his name Seti, which comes from Set, the brother and murderer of Osiris. So it's interesting. But Charlie, I know, was a good friend of John Anthony West. That's how I originally met him. And I actually got to help him a little bit, typing up some of these handwritten notes he had on the Book of Gates many, many years ago. And I've been very fascinated by him ever since. And knowing that John respected him as one of the best translators of the hieroglyphs, I have a great respect for him. And this article he wrote on that page is also amazing and worth checking out. So, since the Osiris Shaft has a similar layout to the Osirion, could the Osiris Shaft actually be as old as the Osirion? And since it's located so centrally in the Giza Plateau, this also suggests it could be part of the original design of Giza and not one of the later things added during the dynastic period. And if we look back to Helena Blavatsky and the Theosophists, they were discussing this idea that the Atlanteans had emigrated not only to Egypt, but also to India. And the Aryan race she describes being one that migrated across all the way to Asia. So the very same Atlantean immigrants could have built both of these structures, perhaps Ketereshwar and the Osiris Shaft. And if we count back four yugas, or three, the three pillars that have already fallen, we're talking about the descending cycle. So by the time we come back up all four, we're back to the Golden Age, which again is pointing us towards this Age of Leo. Just like all this stuff at Giza is pointing us to the Age of Leo, about 10,500 BC. So again, we could be talking about similar cultural roots between Tibet or India and Giza. The oldest artifacts that were actually found in the Osiris Shaft date back to the 6th dynasty. So, of course, it's very suggestive that it was at least being used in the 6th dynasty, but it could be much older still. This is another reason why we should be sorting through all the silt and mud on the floor of the chamber, because we'll likely find older artifacts in there. And that's not to mention additional chambers beyond that point that we may find. And as Manu has suggested, these additional chambers that it could lead to could very well be connected to the record halls. These could be major caches of pre-dynastic artifacts and records. So this is, of course, very important to pursue these leads. So in his report, Zahi also mentions that remains of a skeleton were discovered in the sarcophagus on the third level. And this is actually pretty weird because why would you mention that a skeleton was found and say nothing more about it? This is one of the most important structures on the entire Giza Plateau, centrally located, and there is a central sarcophagus in the middle of the third deepest known level. This has got to be a really important person. If there were actually bones found in there, you'd expect a lot more information about it. Instead, he just says this skeleton exists, we found it, and he mentions nothing about additional testing, carbon testing, or genetic testing, nothing like that. So Jimmy Corsetti recently brought up this question on a debate with him that was hosted by Piers Morgan. And Zahi basically said that he discovered the sarcophagus empty, that there was nothing inside, despite the fact that his report clearly said a skeleton was in there.
So I guess my question for Zahi, I'd very much like to know is, what did you find inside that sarcophagus?
Okay.
And when
I opened the sarcophagus, it was completely empty because Osiris is a myth. He's the one who controlled the underground tunnels at Giza. Because Giza, this is, and this why there is no mummy that we found. And all of this, we published that this is the tomb of symbolic burial of the tomb of Osiris, who control the underground tunnels at Giza Plateau. But there is no mummy. This is the first time I hear about a mummy found in this sarcophagus.
And then Jimmy went on to look into this afterwards and made another video and showed that there were many reports claiming that this sarcophagus was originally found empty. However, there are several references that Zahi himself made to the sarcophagus having a skeleton in it. For one thing, in his book Giza and the Pyramids with Mark Lehner, he does say that inside the sarcophagus we found the remains of a skeleton. And in the next paragraph, he actually says, with the mummy interred in its sarcophagus. So not just a skeleton, but a mummy. He specifically says in his book. That's the running gag with Zahi. It's all in his book. Well, here's something that actually is. There have been rumors going around at Giza that there was a very unique being discovered in that sarcophagus. Simply rumors. I'm just saying this is something I've heard before. People have said it was an extraterrestrial mummy. I've heard at one point even that it was a winged humanoid. So, I don't know. These things are just rumors as far as I know, but it's very suspicious the fact that Zahi is now saying it was always empty, even though there are not only two, but three reports where he says a skeleton was inside, a mummy was inside. I found the third reference to this skeleton in an article titled The Mysterious Osiris Shaft of Giza that was published on drhawass.com, which is a website that's no longer up. I only found it through the Wayback Machine. And in this article, you can see he says the sarcophagus contained the remains of a skeleton along with several amulets dating to the late period, which he also mentions in his initial report. And he mentions the 6th dynasty pieces here as well. So we actually have three references where Zahi himself tells us that this skeleton was discovered in the sarcophagus. Now, if we look closer at the article I found on the Wayback Machine, there's another line that's very important speaking about the second level, not the third, where he says 3 of the side chambers on the second level contain stone sarcophagi in the style of the 26th dynasty, and 2 of the sarcophagi contained human bones. 3 sarcophagi were found on the second level, he says here, and 2 of them contained human bones. So one of these sarcophagi are now missing. Now, if we go back to the 1934 report from Salim Hassan, we remember that the second level was surrounded by 7 burial chambers, in each of which is a sarcophagus. So Hassan was talking about 7 sarcophagi down there, or possibly 6, because one of those 7 was the chamber that has the shaft going down to the third level. Maybe he meant all of the chambers besides that one, but he's saying at least 6, maybe 7 were in there, which means when Zahi found only 3, 3 or 4 others had already been stolen by 1997. between 1993 and 1997. When we go back to Zahi's original report, he says at one point that 4 of these chambers contain sarcophagi and artifacts, which means maybe he's saying the 4th just had artifacts, but the other 3 also had sarcophagi. And a little further down, he talks about this missing sarcophagus. The 3rd one is the one that was found in Chamber C, just to the left when you first come down, where he says an anthropoid or human-shaped sarcophagus of granite was discovered, set into a pit that had been cut into the floor. So this is the one he's talking about right here. You first come down and it's over to the left, and this is what the pit looks like, cut into the floor. So this is the sarcophagus that's missing. You can see that it's a very skinny, strangely shaped sarcophagus compared to these other ones that are a bit wider. And here you can see all 3 of them. These 2 are still in place. This one is gone. We've never heard about it since. So essentially, if we combine this with what's on the 3rd level, we're talking about 3 bodies, or 3 sets of bones at least, and 1 sarcophagus that were initially reported by Hawass, all of which were never seen or spoken of again. At least 3 other sarcophagi were stolen from the 2nd level before 1997 when Zahi went in, because Salim Hassan saw at least 6, if not 7, in 1933, and only 2 remain today. So this is really the question that Zahi should answer for. What happened to this skinny little one that was found in this chamber? Because I know basically every sarcophagus in Giza around all the museums of Cairo. I've never seen this thing. And correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Please let me know if you've ever seen any of the sarcophagi from the Osiris Shaft in any of the museums. If you've ever heard any articles or reports about those, let me know, because as far as I'm aware, these have never been mentioned again. And I am very curious what happened to this one. This is just information I'm putting out there. You can take it, Jimmy, bring it back next time, because I'm not going to get the invite to speak with Zahi. I don't think he wants to speak with me at all. The first mention of this structure came from Herodotus in the 5th century BC, and he didn't tell us too much about it. He didn't associate it with Osiris. In fact, he considered that it may have been the tomb of King Khufu. Others had mentioned it as early as Colonel Howard Weiss and John Shea Perring in the 1830s when they marked it on a map as Shaft 1, but they also didn't mention much about it. It wasn't until 1933 when my favorite Salim Hassan ended up discovering the shaft and actually bringing attention to it. This is my favorite picture of him and his son together. Hassan was conducting all kinds of excavations at Giza between the late 1920s into the 1930s. And by the mid 1930s, there were articles like this coming out, and people were talking about this secret city under Giza that he had discovered. So he wrote about the Osiris Shaft in Excavations at Giza 1933 through 34. And he mentioned a couple important facts about it. He said that in his time, the water level was so high that it was up to the top of this lower shaft, and so he couldn't even descend down into the 3rd chamber. So he only noted the upper and middle chambers. In the following decades, it was actually used as a water source. It was used as a well for drinking water, and workers would even go swimming down there. It wasn't until 1996 that another major revelation came through, and this was thanks to Boris Said and Dr. J.J. Hurtak and several others who were involved in what was called the shore expeditions. This is something I've already covered as well, so I'll just give a brief overview here. But essentially, my friend Ray Grassi, who took this photo, had written an article called Uncovering the Lost Tomb of Osiris, Personal Reflections on an Archaeological Mystery. Ray was on the original expedition that made this discovery, and so this article of his is an incredible resource if you really want to know how things went down. I did an interview with Ray that we called Discovering the Tomb of Osiris, and in that interview we covered all of this. This is one of his original photographs of when the sarcophagus lid was first discovered in the mud, and it was their team who discovered it. The lid was found just underneath the ladder, right where the shaft connects to the 3rd level. This is another of the images when they were first clearing mud off of the sarcophagus lid. You can also see many orbs in this image because there are many spirits down in the room. The lid was eventually moved into place on top of the box in the middle of the room, but there's some debate as to whether or not these are even a set, if this lid actually goes to the box that it's seen on top of now. Ray shared many of his photographs with me, which were very interesting because they actually covered not only what was in the Osiris Shaft, but other GPR scans that were done, in this case, right next to the satellite pyramids of the Great Pyramid. Sadly, Dr. Shore and Boris Said are no longer with us today, so we can't ask either of them about these missions. Ray did, however, mention to me that there were some interviews on Coast to Coast with Art Bell where Boris Said told a lot more of the story, and I was able to find those interviews online. In one of these interviews from 11/11/1997, Boris Said actually spoke about a documentary he had made and which he was selling at the time on VHS tapes. It had never been made public, but he was selling it to raise money to try and continue the expeditions at Giza. So I shared this interview publicly, and I asked everyone I knew if they had any idea where a copy of this videotape might be, and I got a response from Bill Busha. He still had a copy of the videotape, and he not only sent it to me, but he also uploaded it to YouTube in full. So this is what it's called on YouTube, but I also made a full video that goes through all of the material that came out in that documentary that had never been made public before by Boris Said, and it told us so much about what happened in the 90s. Boris was, among other things, the executive producer of Mystery of the Sphinx in 1993 with John Anthony West. They had since had a falling out, and John wasn't really working with him later in the 90s, but he was still doing these missions to try and get further under the plateau. And in that footage, you can also see the unearthing of the sarcophagus lid before anyone had found anything down there yet. Dr. Thomas Dobecki was the seismologist who had worked with John Anthony West and Dr. Robert Schoch at the Sphinx in 1992 to analyze the subsurface strata there, and he was using seismic surveys at that point. However, in 1995, Boris brought Dr. Dobecki back to Egypt, and this time to use GPR, which gives a lot more information about what you're looking at. The seismic surveys just kind of gave some basic readings, but GPR can actually show you the shape of these voids below ground. So he came back in 95 with GPR equipment and he scanned anomaly A, which is the structure they had located underneath the left paw of the Sphinx. And he also scanned near the pyramids, and he also scanned at the third level of the Osiris Shaft. And there he discovered another subterranean chamber, just like the Khafre project, underneath the third level of the Osiris Shaft. So we have proof from two separate geophysical scans that tell us the third level of the Osiris Shaft is not the bottom. It goes down deeper still. He said there was a tunnel that he detected about 9 feet directly beneath where the sarcophagus lid was found. Because all of the footage that was shot in the Osiris Shaft at that time and all of the actual GPR scans that Dobecki did were never made public. And this is very sad to me because I know that this is extremely important evidence. But in this documentary, Boris at least tells us what Dobecki found, and he shows a couple quick clips of the GPR scans on the computer screen. I'll share the last few minutes of this documentary here because I think this is really important information coming from Boris Said that needs to be added to the bigger picture. I think this tunnel Dobecki found is the real key here. This is what's really being covered up, if anything. And I think it's important to hear Boris state it, how he states it here, because this documentary was never released until just a couple months ago when I was able to track it down.
At the easterly end of the well, the end closest to the Sphinx, a pile of rocks was clearly visible. The story the old guy had told me was that a well had been dug back in 1946. He said that two young Nubian boys were in the bottom of the shaft, chipping away at the floor of the shaft, when suddenly there was a cave-in. The floor gave way, and the boys tumbled about 15 or 20 feet to a room-like cavern. When the dust had settled, the boys found to their horror that they were lying on a polished black granite sarcophagus lid. They looked around, and there was a tunnel, also filled with sarcophagi. The boys were terrified that they'd disturbed the resting place of the dead, some sacred place, some sacred burial place. They covered over the casket that they'd fallen on with some dirt. They took some stones and piled them up to cover over the tunnel, and they fled to the surface. All further work on the well was abandoned. There, along the easterly wall, was the pile of rocks, just as I had seen it, underwater. The pile was now easily accessible. And that's not all. We scraped out a flat area near the base of the ladder to set up our tripod, and there was the polished black granite sarcophagus, just as the boys had described it to the old guide. We had decided to lower Dr. Dobecki and his radar down to the bottom of the well, to try and find out what lay behind the pile of rocks, and, for that matter, under the sarcophagus lid. The plan was to explore the well with radar, and then attempt to persuade the authorities to do an impromptu dig in the rock pile to see what lay behind it. We felt that since the rocks had already been moved once, we would not actually be excavating, just sort of rearranging. For a while, everything went smoothly. Dobecki was lowered safely to the bottom of the well. He fired up his radar and soon established that the black granite slab was only the lid of a sarcophagus. It was about 2 feet thick, and there was no sarcophagus underneath it. Then we hit the jackpot. The radar showed a void located about 9 feet below the sarcophagus lid. According to Dr. Dobecki, this anomalous cavity, as he called it, descended at an angle of 25 degrees directly toward the rear of the Sphinx, 300 yards to the east. Dr. Dobecki stated that this steeply dipping characteristic convinced him that this was not a natural fault, but rather a man-made feature. And then we found the icing on the cake, which convinced us all. A transverse radar scan revealed that this cavity was about 8 feet wide and had a domed ceiling. That's when the trouble really started. I rushed off to find our Egyptian inspector to tell him what we'd found, and he told me that we had no right to use the radar down in the well on this trip. He said that our permit specifically called for the right to shoot, to film the radar, not to operate it. And that's when I found out that Dr. Shore's permit to explore the plateau had been revoked at the end of 1996. Somehow he had neglected to tell me that small detail. That brings us to where we are today, more or less. Dr. Shore has started a lawsuit and has snarled our film in a lengthy court battle. As recently as 4 weeks ago, I went down to the Edgar Cayce Foundation, where Dr. Shore and Zahi Hawass were both featured speakers. I met with Dr. Hawass, and he agreed that he would help us enter the tunnel. He would actually enter the tunnel himself and allow us to film it, if Dr. Shore would agree to a peaceful settlement of our problems. I tried, but unfortunately Dr. Shore would have none of it. He refused, and that was the end of that. Now, finally, I've become convinced that Dr. Shore never wanted to go public with this information at all. I believe that it was always his intention to keep news of the secret chamber and its contents from the public. I believe he used me. I believe he used my ability to get a permit, my ability to get things done in Egypt, to further his own private purposes. I think he intended to keep this from the world from the very beginning. Whatever knowledge lies buried beneath the Sphinx is a legacy for all mankind. I believe that it belongs on the world stage for all to see and evaluate for themselves. Thank you all for watching.
So this is also very important that Boris is describing this pile of rocks covering up this entrance to further chambers with further tombs and other artifacts potentially, and that it's simply blocked by this pile of rocks, which he seemingly found. We don't know if Zahi ever moved this pile of rocks and found the further continuation or not, but he never mentioned anything about it in his report. Unfortunately, the team lost their permission to continue working in the Osiris Shaft after news got back up the ladder that something extremely important had been found. Their permission was revoked, and Zahi Hawass took over the project. He went down there and he lowered the water table so low that they were able to actually excavate the sarcophagus. And soon after, he was seen posing with the sarcophagus and the lid on top of it, And we can see the third level with the lowest ever known water table in this photo. Afterwards, there was a wooden walkway that was built there, and this remained for a short time as they were trying to do work on the back corner. And sadly, a lot of the wood from that walkway was left down there and is still floating around in the water today. So regardless of the fact that this discovery was actually made by the team Boris Said was leading, Zahi Hawass opens his article on the Osiris Shaft saying that he's very happy to write this article about one of his most important discoveries in Giza. He later on Joe Rogan straight up said that he discovered the Osiris Shaft, which I've mentioned before is extremely disrespectful not only to the team that did discover the sarcophagus, but also to Salim Hassan and everyone else who had discovered it before.
But these scientists are saying they can. Do you know about the Osiris Shaft? How they've got
I
scanned?
discovered it.
You did, right?
Yes.
But do you know that they use this tomographic
No,
radar? And they,
no, I am the one who found it. This no.
no, I understand you found it, but they also discovered it. They showed that it exists using the same technique.
No,
Jamie, pull
no.
up that.
This is wrong.
Of course, my friends in the Khafre Project have also shown us that the three chambers we see of the Osiris Shaft are not all that's there to be seen. The Khafre Project not only showed us the original three chambers we know of, but it also showed about a total of 7 consecutive chambers going down much deeper to a depth of maybe 300 feet. If this is about 100 feet right here, then we can imagine it's nearly 300 feet to the bottom of this image where there's a huge black chamber and what looks to be a horizontal level in which many of these shafts may be connected. The Khafre Project also suggested that the source of the water in the third level may be coming from this direction, which is to the west. And I'm going to show evidence today that I think confirms this. They also showed another structure to the west of the Osiris Shaft, and this is another shaft going straight down. This could be the shaft shown directly on top of the causeway, or potentially this one off to the side of it, but it clearly goes down all the way to the same level that's roughly 300 feet down. This is also similar to some of the GPR scans that Bill Brown had done with Dr. Abbas in 2006 and the National Research Institute of Astronomy and Geophysics. When they used GPR on the causeway, they found multiple anomalies along it, including one called T3, which is directly to the west of the Osiris Shaft. So T3 is an anomaly seen here, another chamber under the causeway that could be connected to the Osiris Shaft in some way. In this image, you can also see T1, which is on the other side of the Osiris Shaft. This is on the east, so closer to the Sphinx from the Osiris Shaft. And here's another image that shows T3 and T4, these two anomalies here. So there are more chambers underneath the causeway that could be connected to and reached, and any one of them may end up leading down to structures below that level. While we're discussing structures that are similar to the Osiris Shaft, I also have to mention the temple complex that I revealed with Bill Brown in The Secret Underworld of Giza Part 3. This is at the Khufu Causeway, as it's sometimes called, otherwise known as the Great Pyramid Causeway. So this one comes off the Great Pyramid as opposed to the Khafre Pyramid where the Osiris Shaft is, but it also has a similar temple structure about halfway along that causeway, and that temple structure also has a tunnel going straight to its corresponding pyramid, to the Great Pyramid. If you follow that causeway out past this temple location, it continues on eastward towards what's called the Khufu Valley Temple. This is at least what Hawass and Lehner have called it, which is way out in the village area and is still covered with houses and businesses on top. But part of the causeway has been uncovered to date. So this is basically the same type of structure for the Great Pyramid as the Osiris Shaft is for the Khafre Pyramid. So you can look back to that video if you want more information about this temple. Essentially, it's a model that was commissioned by William Brown, who I've been working with at Giza a lot. and he built this model based on eyewitness testimony from someone we know in the village who was actually working down in this structure and described every chamber. So what finally came of all of this is that in 1999, Zahi Hawass got his Fox News TV special. And in the TV special he finally did, he did not mention any of this tunnel that Dobecki had found connecting the Osiris Shaft straight to the Sphinx. He didn't mention any of the scans Dobecki did at the Sphinx or in between there in the Osiris Shaft. He didn't mention any of these incredible discoveries made by the shore expedition, but he did at least show the entrance to the mud tunnel and from the third level of the Osiris Shaft. So that was about all he gave us. And this is the clip from the end of that show where he gave us the biggest reveal, which was simply to show us the entrance to this tunnel, but not what was inside it. He said at that time he didn't know where it led.
Zahi, the American prophet Edgar Cayce talked years and years ago about a lost civilization, hidden tunnels that would lead to answers about it. Could this have anything to do with that?
You know, Susie, Edgar Cayce and lost civilization, it's a legend, it's a myth. The Arabs in the last century, they talked about all of this, and psychic brought it to us back. But, to be fair, I did not excavate this tunnel yet. Then really I don't know where it leads us. But I always say that you never know what the sand and the tunnels of Egypt may hide.
So my only objective here is to find the truth about these tunnels and share the truth with the world. And the truth is, it always ends up with Zahi taking complete control and basically covering it up, telling us that he looked and there's nothing to see. That's how it always ends. For the tunnels at the Osiris Shaft, the tunnels at the Sphinx, going back to the 1990s, going even back to the 1970s, when Zahi was working with Hugh Lynn Cayce, Edgar Cayce's own son, and Mark Lehner, who wrote his first book all about the Cayce information called The Egyptian Heritage. So Lehner and Hawass have both been intimately tied with the ARE, the Cayce Foundation, for decades. And in the 1990s, this was just a continuation of some of those projects. Dr. Shore, an ARE member, was the man who originally got Zahi his scholarship to Pennsylvania University. So this is why people say the ARE, indirectly at least, sponsored Zahi's education, as well as his career in the following decades. Zahi has lectured at the ARE many times. He's worked with John Van Auken and others. John Van Auken, though, who is basically the world's foremost authority on the Cayce information, and also a very, very sweet, gentle, kind soul, even felt the need to call Zahi out on this last year. Because while Zahi's doing all this on-the-ground research, looking into the halls of records, publicly he's denying its existence and saying that Cayce just made this up. So it's very hypocritical, his relationship to the ARE. And John Van Auken last year called him out because he went to one of his lectures and saw that he was starting every one of these lectures in the US with this claim that Edgar Cayce was just making up a fantasy and the Hall of Records doesn't exist. But I've also spoken with Howard Middleton Jones, another friend of mine who was doing amazing work in the early 2000s, especially. He co-authored the books Giza Genesis. And in those books, there are some really exclusive, amazing details about the Hall of Records and how it can be accessed at Giza. And Zahi was certainly paying attention. He was actually asking Howard's teammates if they could instruct him on how to find it. All the while, he's publicly denying it exists. But he was looking for the Hall of Records, Zahi himself. So it all ends with basically Zahi gatekeeping the information. And everything we do know about the tunnels does tell us that they are extremely important and they do likely lead to these records, probably through that tunnel Dobecki found connecting to the Sphinx. And I've released another film recently called The Pyramid of Records, or Revealing the Pyramid of Records, which gets into some more details that we just released from the Cayce archives, showing some of these maps and diagrams where they're kind of postulating how these record halls might be connected to the Sphinx through these tunnels that are going over to the east from there. So all of those chambers as well, I believe, are connected straight to the Osiris Shaft and to the Khafre Pyramid. and to all three pyramids, actually. One of the only people who's ever covered this subject is Richard Gabriel, and of course I've talked with him a lot about this. Richard and I both released an expose on the NC2 complex, which is another of the deepest structures at Giza, the caves in the northwest corner. But Richard is one of the few people who also explored the tunnels, and he drew one of the only diagrams of the Osiris Shaft that actually shows these tunnels at all and approximates their direction and where they were going. So here you can see that they come out of the back end of the third level chamber and they head off towards the west, and it splits into two after a certain length. From above, he shows these tunnels going off in the direction of the west towards the Khafre Pyramid. And he suggests that they may end up connecting to some of these other shafts in that direction. This is one of his photographs and one of the very first and only that we ever had of these tunnels. Richard also believes he's discovered many illustrations and murals on the walls and even on some of the sarcophagi within the Osiris Shaft and the NC2 complex. He has thousands of high-resolution images that he's put certain filters on to try and bring these images out. But I know he's going to be making some films about this on his own channel soon, so you can check that out as well. So this was a photograph of a young boy who Zahi sent into this hole to see how far he could crawl. And Richard also brings attention here to the fissure coming out below here. And I think this is very important because I think this is essentially the very mysterious source of the water. I think all the water is coming in through this fissure and being regulated by it. It was actually through Richard's website that I first found the dead link to the article by Hawass that was only available on the Wayback Machine today. And in that article, it also tells us about the mud tunnels. He's talking about the narrow tunnels at the end of the northwest corner, the lowest level. The tunnel's only large enough to admit a young child at its entrance, and further along it becomes filled with mud. In 1999, I sent a boy into the tunnel to explore it. He was able to go only 5 meters before it became too narrow for even his slight frame. In November of 2008, television producer Richard Reese supplied the SEA with an endoscopic camera to continue the exploration of this small tunnel. The team who carried out this effort were able to insert the endoscope only 10 meters into the tunnel before the mud inside made it impossible to go further. In December, the team returned with two self-propelled rovers equipped with cameras, which were able to travel further into the tunnel. At about 6.5 meters, the team discovered a branch that split off the tunnel. They were able to send the camera 10.5 meters into this branch before it became too narrow and muddy for the rovers to go any further. The team also found that the main tunnel continues to a total length of about 21 meters, where it seems to end, although it was impossible to determine this with certainty. I have been in touch with a Japanese team who plan to bring an even more advanced robot, which should be able to continue past the points where the earlier machines were forced to stop. On Thursday, June 9th, 2009, we will begin the work of sending a new robot into the tunnel in the hope of finding out where it leads. Hopefully, we will be able to find out why it was carved out of a rock so deep underground. Solving this mystery will truly be an amazing adventure, and I hope that you will enjoy learning the answer to the secret of the Osiris Shaft along with me and my team. Soon after, he did work with a Japanese team, and they did send the camera much deeper into the tunnel. However, that footage was never released by Hawass or reported on. It was eventually released by the Japanese team, and I was able to find this footage online after a friend of mine had uploaded it on YouTube. But it's very blurry, and it does not show the entire length of the tunnel. Aside from that, there is only one other source online of any images or video of this tunnel, and that is from Mr. Beast. He and his team did actually get into this tunnel a little ways and showed a little bit of what's inside it, but not very much. So even today, there is very little to go on, and no one has ever shown the full length of these tunnels. The image you can see here is the very last frame from the Japanese footage as they were pushing the camera in, so we never saw anything past this point. But I can tell you that I made it to that point, and I went past it. So I'm very happy to announce today that I am the first person to ever go in and fully document the entire length of this tunnel. I filmed it all on a 360-degree 8K camera, and I went all the way to the very back end. So today, for the first time in human history, this cave will be revealed to the world.
上がっていると考える秘密のトンネル。その調査を谷本先生率いる大阪大学の調査隊が行いました。岩盤の専門家から見ても、この3層構造に掘られた縦穴は興味深いもの。地下30メートルにある秘密のトンネル。宮本たちの見た入り口から10メートルの先はどうなっているのか。用意したのは医療用の内視鏡。それを特別に長く改良し、トンネルの奥を覗こうという作戦です。内視鏡をトンネルの奥深くに挿入するためにパイプが用意されました。パイプをつないで行き、その中に内視鏡を通すのです。古代のロマンを探るには常に汗まみれ、泥まみれ。ザヒ博士も興味津々で調査の様子を見に来ました。二人はスフィンクスの調査などで旧知の間柄です。
This is camera head, yeah, which is used for medical inspection.
Yeah.
When they need a surgical operation.
But the mud will stop it.
So I have decided to have a pipe, guide pipe here.
But the pipe, maybe it's very narrow. How this pipe will go?
This can go.
This can go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
トンネルの先に何があるのかを確認するのがザヒ博士の悲願。博士自らパイプにカメラを入れました。カメラが映し出す未知なる世界。考古学を支えるのは人一倍の好奇心。まず映し出されたのはパイプに入った泥でした。泥を押しのけるとトンネル15メートル地点の内部が映し出されました。
OK。今入り口から15メートル地点だね。
すみません、入ってるよ。OK。はい。
慎重にカメラを奥へと送ります。鮮明に映し出されたトンネルの中。下の部分には土ぼこりが溜まっています。入り口から16メートル。入り口から17メートル。土を押しのけ進んでいくと、きれいに削られた場所に到達。これは明らかに人工的に掘られた跡に見えます。
OK。行ってるよ。もうすごくスムーズに行ってるよ。
19メートル。カメラをさらに奥へと進めます。狭く曲がっていますが、トンネルは続いている。そしてなぜかトンネルは2つに分かれています。
So I've kept this footage in real time so that you can really feel like you're descending down to the bottom with me and going into this tunnel. I think it's best to leave it that way. I've showed a couple shots of me inside the tunnel just to give a context of how tight it was in there. But mostly I tried to just film the surface of the stone.
Sitting down. The second level of the Osiris Shaft right now. Down first so I could get a little head start here. Okay. So Armando. Yes. Oh man.
Secondo me qui non c'è.
No other lights down here?
Wow. Okay.
Here's the Osiris Shaft. Totally full of water, right up to the third level. I'm in the water right now, up to my shins. And that is where we're going over there, to the tube tunnels.
Alza la testa.
Trevor,
Yeah,
where are you?
I'm going under.
Che dici?
Maybe just hold this light for me for a second.
Okay.
Hold it in here.
Okay.
Aspetta, rimani qua così e faccio un
Okay.
po'.
Actually, yeah, just let me take that for 1 second.
Up to where?
Okay.
Right now,
Sorry?
right now I'm up to my thighs. I'm gonna do a walk around with the lamp, and then bring it back. So wait 1 second.
I wait for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I'm up to my waist. I'm at the sarcophagus. Okay. I'm at the sarcophagus now. I'm gonna do a sweep around. This is all you can see of the 3rd level.
Tesoro,
Eh,
ci sei?
sì, che dici? Che dici?
Okay.
Oh, mi vedi?
Sì, più o meno, sì.
Ho trovato un posto per appoggaiarmi.
Ma non stai nell'acqua?
No, sono su una pietra quasi nell'acqua, a fior d'acqua.
Ok.
I can't see
E
where.
cosa vedi?
Ci sono pietre qua sotto. Ci sono blocchi, ma non ci sono sarcofagi.
I can't see where the sarcophagus is now. Okay, okay, I can step here.
There is a sarcophagus.
Yeah,
And what?
I'm on top of it.
But did you see it? Did you
Yeah.
see it?
I'll put this into the water after, but first, there's a little island over here I'm gonna step up onto. Oh god.
It was totally naked.
It's very slippery. Okay. I'm on some stones here. Okay, I'm getting most of the upper part
Cosa
here.
sta facendo? Camminando in acqua?
Sta camminando in acqua.
Camminando?
Sì, sì. È
Okay.
un unico ambiente qua sotto. Tesoro. È un unico ambiente qua sotto. Quasi
Cos'è tutto quello che dicevamo?
è qua, è tutto pieno d'acqua.
Non c'è niente.
No.
These
C'è un
are,
sarcofago, deve esserci un sarcofago qua sotto che sto cercando.
these are the 4 pillars.
L'avete messo?
Sì, ora al centro di un blocco di pietra che ci sta salendo giù.
No, is there something much dry where you can put things on top?
No, there is any point dry. There is no only water.
Okay.
Okay.
And how high is the ceiling? You can stand?
No, yes, here, yes, I can stand, and also Trevor can stand.
Trevor is standing?
Yes, stand.
And how much room is that?
Oh, that was half meter.
Okay.
Okay, now I have to swim over to the tunnel here. Now I have to go all the way. Point of no return.
Okay, I wait for you, no problem.
Okay. Okay. I don't know how deep it is here. I'll probably go.
We should bring a single of water.
Yeah.
Nice water.
Yeah.
Ma se ti l'acqua da riva, da riva.
No, è la piazza delle gambe, poco sopra il ginocchio. Poco sotto il cavallo, Sì.
Non puoi?
Ma vuoi scendere?
Che dici?
Sì, scendi a vedere.
Ma però mi cambio.
Come vuoi.
Oh, that's deep.
No, io dicevo rimani qua sulle scale.
No, chi ci rimane? Io
Ma dai, vieni. Cambia le scelte.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to swim. Very deep over here.
It's deep there.
Yeah. Okay. I have to take the plunge. This is scary.
It was totally deep.
Yeah, it's deeper than my pole.
But I would like to know why these features. Did you know this? Here, why is the entrance was digged in this way?
I don't know.
This is
Okay.
the question.
Okay, I'm going for it. Okay. Okay. I made it.
There is an entrance from your right.
I made it. Little path there. Okay. Made it across. Okay. Okay, now my hands are muddy, but I kept the camera dry. We are in the mud tunnels in the third level of the Osiris Shaft. Okay. I don't think I can clean my hands very well. I'm gonna take the camera off this stick now. And head in here. Okay. Okay. I'm now in the Osiris Shaft tunnels. This is the entrance. Now let's see how far we can go. Okay. Oh my goodness. Oh boy. Oh, this is tight. This is another tight one. Oh, it's so slippery. Okay. Okay. Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay.
Okay. Oh, this is difficult. Okay. But it opens up here quite a bit. Just gotta get through. Holy shit. Oh. Okay. Okay. Wow. Oh my god. Oh my god. There's another tunnel going back. Okay. I'm ditching the slippers here. I'm gonna lose these slippers. Okay. Wow. There's another one. Right down there. I'll hit that on the way back. Let's keep moving forward. Gotta get this thing over here. Stupid. Okay. Just broke one. Come on, just get off. Okay. All right. Got more excavations here, it looks like. Oh, that's the end right there. Not crawling through that one. That hole is about 10 inches across. All right, I'm gonna get up to it. Stick the camera in. Okay, I'm gonna need the pole. Stick the camera. Maybe 10 feet further. Look at this. Wow. Now I got a limited battery. This is my dive lamp. It's water safe, but limited battery. Okay. I'm bringing the pole with me. Okay. All right. Before we go further, I'm gonna get this on the pole. Now, these tunnels go way, way further. Wow. And the Japanese went in there. In like 2000 something, 8 or so. So they can send an endoscope very far. This is amazing. Oh, geez, can I get through that? I can go a little further. Oh god, this is scary. This is scary. I don't know how I can turn around and get back over this thing. But, okay. I can get through it. Holy shit. Okay. Okay. So we made it over that tiny little hole. Oh my god. You can hear that same heartbeat sound, a dripping that I've heard in NC2. Oh, there's cracks going way down. Oh my god. Totally covered in mud here. Okay. Peek around. Lens. Oh boy, this is holy. It's going down like 10 feet. Oh, my light's gonna die. Quickly, I can tell. Okay. So that's the end. Okay, that's the end. For now. Oh my god. It just ends. It just ends. Okay. 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 Back this pole. How can I turn around in here? Oh my god. This is amazing. Let me see. Anything. Clean to wipe the lens with. No, it's just dirty. Alright, folks. I'm at the end of the tube tunnel of the Osiris Shaft. Totally covered in mud. There's a crack underneath me right here. Oh, see this? And that's the end. I'm gonna try to turn around here. Head back. Okay. Okay. photos here, maybe. Okay. There's no way to move. Oh, God. Okay, taking the camera off the pole. And here we go. Okay. Oh, I feel like a crocodile. Look at that. I gotta go over. I went under before. Okay. This entire camera full of mud. Except for the lens. I'm trying to keep it clean. Oh, this is a tricky one. Holy... Wow. Okay. Just had to bend my spine backwards a little bit. Okay. Now, let's get all this. Let's try and get more of this crack. Someone trying to excavate right here. There's a big hole dug in the dirt. This is my pole. Okay. Let's get this crack as best we can. Okay. Okay. Little bit of breathing room right here. Now I gotta go get that tunnel chute. Okay, let's see what's down this way. You know what? I'm going backwards for this one. I ditched the pole. There's my slippers. Let's see. I'm not turning around down there. I'm not crawling up this one backwards. Oh, it's just super tight, super quick. Okay. We're just gonna go with the pole here, because that's not gonna go too far. What a mess. Everything's covered in mud. Oh, it's too muddy to... There we go. Okay. There's the end. All right. Gonna put on my slippers. Hopefully I don't lose these in the water. Okay. Slippery. I'm just gonna fall in here. But that's gonna be okay. Okay.
Coming. Okay.
There's another room.
Just went through the tunnels. Gotta dive back in now. Alright. Going under. That was a good one. Right here. In the middle. This is one of the four pillars. These two are the bases of these four pillars that were once around the sarcophagus. The lid is now on top of the sarcophagus. So now I'd like to present what could be a very important original discovery. However, I'm simply presenting it as a theory, as a hypothesis. I'm not making a claim that this is the case, but in watching my footage in the mud tunnel, I noticed something that caught my eye. Not far from the entrance into the tunnel, before you even reach the secondary tunnel, I noticed something very strange in the ceiling. It looked to me like two square blocks poking out from the mud that were level to the tunnel. So they were forming the ceiling, but they could also be forming the floor of a chamber above it. So this was the first frame I saw, and instantly I felt this could be two square blocks next to each other, set into the floor of a chamber above the tunnel. These are level to the tunnel, level to the water and to the ground. So this would be the bottom surface of what may be actual square blocks that are forming the floor of a chamber above. Here I've shown the two blocks in green and blue just to illustrate what I'm saying. And again, this is just a suggestion. I'm not a geologist. I've studied some geology on my own independently, but I'm not an expert on this. I'm just saying from my perspective, this looks like it could be two blocks of a construction poking through the mud here. You can even notice down on the bottom there's a little bit of white, which looked kind of like it could have been a mortar masking over another seam on the bottom, which runs basically parallel to the rest of the stone. I've got a couple other still images, which were some of the best high resolution images I could get from the footage I already had. Because I didn't notice this while I was actually in the tunnel, I wasn't able to get closer up, higher resolution footage of it, but it could be inspected closer. So these are just some of the shots I was able to pull from the footage where you can see, you've got what really looks like a 90-degree angle between these two stones and a very straight seam between these two here. This is the location where that stone is, right in the ceiling. So there could be another chamber right on top of the tunnel here. It's before we even reach the secondary tunnel split off. So after noticing this, I had to, of course, go back and inspect the ceiling the full length of the way as best I could. And if we start back at the third level chamber, you can see this shot showing how flat that ceiling is in that chamber and how that kind of continues on into the tunnel as the ceiling of the tunnel. When you look straight up from that position, you can even notice some parallel and perpendicular lines up in the ceiling there. And this looks a lot like it's natural bedrock, but it's got these fractures that are somewhat perpendicular and parallel. And you never really know, because sometimes if this was a limestone block that was placed in there, maybe mineral accretions could have kind of expanded off of it and kind of made it massed in to look like it was more part of the bedrock. Again, this is a question for a geologist. I'm just suggesting we should keep our eyes open to this stuff. A little further ahead, you can see some more indications of what could be some perpendicular parallel lines, potentially from stones that are plugging up this ceiling. Because remember, we are inside this fissure, and the fissure runs straight up. So most of the ceiling is naturally kind of sloping off towards this point, like an arched point. So when you have this perfectly flat, level ceiling to it, it kind of seems unnatural. A little bit further, you can see this, where there are as well a few lines that seem to be somewhat parallel and perpendicular. And then further along, when you get to actually what I'll call the H gate, basically, the point where you come to this bar coming across with a small hole under and a larger hole above it. This is right on top of that. Again, I'm not suggesting these are actual blocks here, but I do want to show that there are some of these perpendicular seams that end up showing up in the ceiling throughout the whole length of the tunnel. And it is kind of strange when you have these areas where the entire ceiling is flat as opposed to rounded and organic as it is in most of the cave. So these flat areas kind of stick out, and it's possible these could be blocks that were placed there. Here again, you can see a few lines that could actually be seams between stones, potentially, also up in the ceiling above me. And in this shot, just so you know I'm not cherry picking this stuff, I think this is the bedrock itself. And in this one, you can actually see that there are some parallel cracks in the natural bedrock. So I'm not trying to fit a round peg in a square hole here. It could all be natural. I'm certainly open to that. Here you can see another couple lines that seem to be perpendicular to each other, could be seams around a stone above me. So this is what I call the H gate, because it kind of looks like a capital H, and you had a tiny hole here and a larger one above. When I first came up to this gate, I didn't even see the opening above it, which is why I figured this was the end. I couldn't make it further because this is impassable. That's a tiny hole. And I didn't realize either that it was the final frame from the Japanese footage. I didn't realize that everything past there had never been filmed at all. Here's another image of it. And again, I wanted to show this so you could see the natural organic shape of the cave ceiling in most parts of the cave. If it's not a fissure going straight up, it's kind of rounded and bulging. It's not flat like these areas where we're seeing what could potentially be blocks. This is directly above the H gate. So when you're looking up at the ceiling, you see this whole section. It's just perfectly flat and smooth. And again, it looks like there's some seams between that could potentially be stones or could be natural bedrock, but it's very smooth compared to everything around it that's weathered out by the water. When you're looking straight up, you could almost see what could be interpreted potentially as a scene of some pyramids carved into the ceiling using this seam as a horizon line. Again, I don't think that's the case. I don't think this is actually illustrations of the pyramids, but I do think it's worth mentioning because it's important to open your mind and your eyes up to these things that could be there, especially considering there are potentially murals or, natural features of the cave that are carved into animal figures or things like that, much like we find at the NC2 complex. You've got to keep your eyes open for it. Here it is zoomed out a little bit more, and yeah, you could almost try and argue this could be a scene of the pyramids carved in, even with this one maybe behind. But again, I'm not making that claim. I think it's just important to show how to open your eyes to look for things that you wouldn't normally observe. So this is moving on past the H gate. You come into this very narrow area where you really have to squeeze through, and you can kind of get an idea of what the ceiling looks like in there. It's possible this is just a harder level of the limestone, and what's weathered out under it has crumbled off, but this is like the bottom level of a harder course. This is a little bit further along where you see it actually opens up to the left and then it goes down several feet down into this slightly more open area. And this is where you really begin to see down into the fissure. This is a shot from down in that area looking back towards the H gate. And when you come back, you can see the gate there. Here are a couple close-ups of that area, which is a very peculiar feature. You can see another little space up here, but actually the way out is down behind right there. So that's the way back out. Here's another spot where I found what looked like it could just be a seam between a couple stones. Again, not making any claims. Now here's some of the images of the fissure itself. This one's looking up towards myself at the top. So I stuck it down at least 10 feet into the fissure. This is looking down in there. And this could be some of the actual deepest footage ever shot at the Giza Plateau. This could be 115 to 120 feet down, maybe more. These ones are looking straight down into the fissure. This one is looking horizontally through the fissure, so you can see some of the layers of the limestone, and the softer layers are getting worn out by the water. This one is again looking down, straight down into it. Here I am on top of it, looking down in and inspecting it. This is another shot going straight down into it. But now we come to the end chamber, and this gets pretty interesting. The ceiling's very flat coming into there, but then it has this very rounded, curved, organic shape, like an archway coming under it. It's interesting too. My eyes started to see things. I almost saw like this, the head of a snake here. You can see like with the eye, and it's looking to the right here with its body coming this way. I don't think that's actually a carving either, but it sort of looks like it. If you see this here, it looks a bit like a snake head and the snake's body coming across. Just another thing I kind of noticed, but I don't know if that's real or not. Getting closer in, you can see this is basically coming into the very end chamber right here, and the fissure goes all the way back to it. There was this interesting, what looked like a worked kind of shelf coming out from the left-hand side, and it looks bulged out due to the fisheye effect, but this is actually a perfectly flat, straight shelf. And here we're coming in closer. You can see the ceiling gets very smooth and kind of crackled, but it looks very different from anywhere else in the cave. You can see this is coming straight up to the end now. That's the final chamber, and the fissure is running straight up to it. And again, the ceiling's very smooth here. Now, when we get into this final chamber, this is the fissure I'm coming in along, and this is where it suddenly stops. There's a perpendicular fissure that just cuts off the end of it, and then this is perfectly intact. Over to the left side, it actually continues a little bit more. So the crack comes in, it gets cut off, and then there's a kind of continuation off on the left side, going only a few feet further. But this is the back wall, this is the back end. So here I'm looking back at myself. You can see that's the end wall. This is the end of the fissure. This is looking straight down into that T-joint between the end. Here's another shot of that. So if you look down into that crack at the end, you can see there are holes going down. These are, again, holes we could drop cameras down into, stick endoscope cameras into, and we could see if this is going down to something more. This is the left side of the end chamber. So you can see this is the end crack, and then it continues a little further right here. And this is kind of just like this, almost like an altar station at the very end of it there. You can see again, same area. There is one other very interesting feature of this final chamber, which is the ceiling, which looks like this perfectly round kind of portal looking ceiling with a big crack through it, but it almost looks like it's a door of some kind. It's very strange how there's these circular seams around it. This is nothing like any of the other areas of the ceiling in the entire length of the tunnel. It's very strange. I don't know if this was some kind of actual door that was masked into place. Maybe you can come up from here. Maybe you can come down into here from somewhere else. I got a few shots of this. This is looking back towards the entrance. That's me with my light looking into the final wall. And you can see the strange ceiling above it. Just a couple other shots of that. But this thing just did not look like any other place in the cave. I've not seen any of this perfectly circular seams coming around it. It's a weird point in the structure. And it's just very weird that the entire fissure just kind of ends here instead of petering out like it does in NC2. The fissure ends up, having these pointed ends to it. In the ceiling, it's arched. In the floor, it's cut down in. But this looks nothing like the rest of the cave. So here's a couple of these shots. There you can see again. So that is the end. It's the termination chamber of the entire mud tunnel. This is what I've been waiting years to see. And again, everything in this area past the H gate has never been filmed or photographed before. No one but myself has ever been on record in this space. So this is very exciting to get this footage out finally. And this is the location where I actually finally found enough space where I could turn around. Otherwise, I was going to have to be backing myself out all the way from that point, at least back to the H gate. There's this one spot where I could kind of cram myself into a spin there and get turned around. But this is what I love to do. This is another shot showing how tight it is. And I want to express that this is not a safe thing to do. And I don't want to encourage anyone to do this. I wanted to document this so that we understand what's there. But now that I don't want to encourage anyone to follow in these footsteps because you can very easily get stuck in there. You could pass out. You could find a spider or a snake. There's a lot of things that are very dangerous about this. And I'm honestly kind of surprised that they do leave it open and allow you to look inside. But if you do, you need to be very, very careful. This shot shows you how tight it actually is. If I do a close up into here, you can see that I'm poking out from this hole here. This hole is so small, I had to go through with my arms up. If I had my shoulders back, I wouldn't have been able to fit through this. I had to get my arms in first. That's how tight it gets. So this is just to show that it's extremely dangerous, and I don't want to encourage anyone else to try and do this themselves. The only reason I did it was because we needed to get some information about this, but really it is very dangerous, and it's a job for a team, a professional team with the right equipment. If we're going to go in there, we need it to be done safely and correctly. We need to get some remote sensing equipment in here. We need to start excavating some of this dirt, but I'll explain in a moment some of the specific ideas I have for projects that could actually be done there that could lead to these further spaces, passages, and chambers. Finishing up these still shots, I just want to show a couple of the secondary tunnel going down. So this one, again, you can see is just full of dirt, and that dirt could be cleared out. And for all we know, you might be able to stand up inside this one. It's very skinny, but we don't know how deep it is. We do know that the fissure's running underneath it, though. So there'd be a lot more room if we dug out this dirt, and that could be done any day. This is the deepest down I went with my own body until I went back up and just stuck the pole past this point. And this was basically the deepest into that tunnel that I got. And this is the back end that we can see of the split off tunnel. When you come back into the junction point, this is what the ceiling looks like above the junction point. And the main tunnel coming in is off to the right. And this is the tunnel going deeper. Yeah, here's one more shot that just shows how tight it gets. I mean, it was really scary. It was frightening, and it was meant to be. This is part of what it is, much like the tube tunnel at the end of NC2. I think this is designed as a kind of fear test. You're meant to basically conquer your fears by moving through this thing. So again, I don't recommend trying to do this. I did it because I felt such a need for the world to see what it looked like, but now that I have, I hope this is enough evidence to get a real project started there. Here you can see I've stacked all 4 layers. You've got the entry level in white, which has the first shaft here. You go down to the second level, slightly darker, to the third level, and the fourth level with the mud tunnels coming off. So I lined up the shafts in the illustrations given by Hawass in his article with the orientation it has in the chamber. This is about how they lay out. It's not perfect, I'm sure, but this is pretty close. So you can see that the first entry level is actually perpendicular to the causeway itself. It's pointing slightly east of north. And then the next 2 chambers are pretty well oriented north to south, and the third level down is slightly tilted off of that. So when we lay this over the satellite imagery, we can see that the tunnel runs about parallel to the causeway itself, heading towards the Khafre Pyramid. We can also see that the secondary tunnel seems to be somewhat close to parallel to these other fissures we can see on the surface over here. And if you look at these on the ground, you can actually see some of them are filled in with stones, like they filled in the crack. But within some of these fissures going down, where you have softer levels of limestone bedrock, it can get carved out and turn into these natural tunnels like we see at NC2. It's very similar. And then those natural tunnels, the biggest ones in the softest layers, are easy to sculpt into usable tunnels, so they might have been modified natural tunnels.
Oh, that bat almost hit me in the face. That's okay.
It also comes pretty close to this shaft we see right there, so there's a very good chance that somehow we could connect over into other things that this shaft leads down to, or the rest that are nearby. There's another up here. And you can also notice that it's in between the area that's actually laid out with stones and the part that's just solid bedrock. The causeway is solid bedrock from here basically up to the Khafre Pyramid. One of the most unexpected things I found in the tunnel was that the split-off tunnel actually forks off on the way back, not on the way in. So Richard had drawn it as if this forked off going in, but it really forks off coming back. And this tunnel descends at a slope downward as if going back towards the chamber. And it's filled in with dirt, so we don't know how big that one is or how far it goes. We don't even know if it may have been intentionally filled in with dirt like we suspect at the NC2 complex. It would be a matter of going into here and crawling back outwards, bucket by bucket, taking that sediment you can see in the end there. You see that dirt right there? We could pull that out, and if we did, then we would be able to crawl through this thing just like Salt and Caviglia obviously did. It's very similar to that. It's just blocked up with dirt. So this could be excavated out and we could find out where that one leads to. That's one loose end. The back end did seem like a natural end to the cave. It looked like bedrock, but it's still very bizarre when you have a seam like this running all the way across and then suddenly it just stops. It doesn't make much sense. It should kind of peter out into a smaller and smaller snake tail, kind of. It is actually very similar to the NC2 tube tunnel at the back end, which we know is very much like crawling through the body of a snake. You could say that about any tunnel, I suppose, but in the NC2 complex, there are actually like rib structures that are as if you're crawling through the body of a snake. And we know that that is called the tunnel of the snake or the cave of the snake. This has to do with Agathodaimon or El Hanash, as this serpent has been called, the protector of Giza and of the underworld there. And as Manu mentions, that snake has also been called Mihen, which is the snake in the game Mihen, which is a board game. And this serpent is supposed to protect the realm of Osiris, the underworld. So it's very similar to that. It's a very snake-like passage that's just heading way down here. And another major takeaway here is that this is running along the natural fissure. So the fissure is extending upwards and downwards from the mud tunnel, mostly the whole way along. I couldn't see it on the bottom the whole way because some of the floor was covered with dirt, once again, which could be removed. And I'm sure we would find that it's filling in the crack going down. In some of the parts where I could see down into the fissure, it was going 12, 15 feet maybe that I could see. And it may go further than that, which is very interesting. So here's my illustration of the Osiris Shaft where you can see the mud tunnel and the secondary tunnel forking backwards, which descends down here and is blocked off. You can see the vertical fissure illustrated coming up and down from the tunnel. And you can see that the tunnel is running approximately parallel to the causeway here. And I've also shown the tunnel discovered by Dr. Thomas Dobecki here. So this tunnel is running basically straight underneath the third level chamber. He said it was 9 feet under where the sarcophagus lid was found, so he detected it right here. And he said specifically that it ran all the way to the Sphinx. He believed it was connected straight into these temples or chambers directly under the Sphinx's body and all the way to the left front paw where he discovered anomaly A. Seeing that the mud tunnel is parallel to the real tunnel, it made me understand that this real tunnel is likely constructed within the same exact fissure. And the fissure is just like what we see at NC2. And at NC2, you can see these larger chambers or larger tunnels carved in with smaller ones above, like they're echoes of this larger one. Because you'll get bigger tunnels carved out with water where there's softer layers of limestone and it's running through. And if there are smaller soft layers, then you might get some of these smaller tunnels carved out of it. But the bigger ones would be useful to modify into usable, walkable tunnels that could take you through. So my working hypothesis here is that this tunnel was one of the large natural fissure tunnels that was modified to be a usable one. And if we could take our time and go through the mud tunnel and drop cameras down through this fissure, I almost guarantee that we could get footage into this tunnel. I believe we just have to drop the camera down through the cracks like I started to do, but I only had a 10-foot pole, so I stuck it down into the crack as far as I could go. If we had it on a string, we could drop it all the way down into this tunnel and see that it's there. We have a very good chance, at least, of that working. We can also scout around the entire floor of the water here and find any additional entrances coming downward that could connect down to here. There is one other area on the left wall when you're looking into the third chamber that's right about here where it looks like there could be another tunnel splitting off into the wall, perhaps underneath the water. So that's another thing we could look into, but we should be really surveying the entire floor of this chamber underneath the water. The pile of rocks that Boris Said mentions, he said it was on the easterly wall, which would mean the entrance wall, this side here, because this would be east. So Boris mentions this pile of stones, and he says that underneath it, it's likely this continuing passageway that leads to many more additional chambers. And Zahi, in his original report on the Osiris Shaft, did say that he sent divers into all the water to inspect the ground floor, but he doesn't tell too much about what they found aside from a few artifacts. And the question remains, did Zahi actually continue on what Boris and JJ were trying to do by moving those stones and finding that continuing passage? Did Zahi's team actually make it into further passages? Nothing like that is mentioned. And regardless of whether or not Zahi actually investigated that pile of stones, the fact remains we could investigate it today. So that's another of the most important leads to follow if we're trying to find a continuing passageway. Now, if we're really critically thinking about this, there is one additional place where they may have put a tunnel entrance that leads to further chambers, which would always remain concealed, perfectly hidden, but accessible to the initiates. There were several traditions speaking about this procession of initiates that goes into the initiation in the Great Pyramid or Khafre Pyramid, that they could actually levitate stones with their voices. They would be chanting, and this would actually lift stones out of their place, and these stones were concealing the entrances to the additional tunnels they needed to use. So perhaps part of the ceremony involved levitating this box out of its hole and entering into a tunnel that's underneath it. This would be the perfect place to hide the tunnel because unless you could move that box with an entire group of initiates that knew the right tones and the right chants and words, this box would never move. But if you could lift it up, you could go down underneath it. And of course, this larger enclosure around the sarcophagus would keep the water out. So this could be a separate continuation coming down. In other words, you could have a vertical shaft coming straight down from under the sarcophagus and tied into the tunnel running east to west, more or less. And it could be completely separate from where the water is enclosed, so it wouldn't get flooded. This could be the entrance down into the further chambers that we know are there. We know there's got to be some way to get further down, and this is one of the only places you could put it where it's not going to be flooded by the same water. So maybe all of this water in here is controlled. The Khafre project was actually right in their illustration showing that the water was coming in from this side. The water must be coming in or out through the fissure because it does connect straight to the chamber. You can see the crack running down from the mud tunnel in the chamber wall itself. So the water is connected into this fissure, which also gives us the unfortunate consequence that that would probably mean this tunnel underneath would be flooded, but you have to assume they had some way of dealing with that. Maybe there is a drain that takes it around and allows this one to stay unflooded. But it seems like it would be a pretty tricky feat to keep the water out of the fissure and the tunnel below it. But the Egyptians were geniuses, so they certainly could have potentially done it. When we add Dobecki's tunnel onto this view, it actually seems like it's not part of the same fissure because we see it much further south than the mud tunnel. And we have to line this tunnel up to the location where the sarcophagus lid was first found, right at the base of the third shaft. So it has to be here and approximately running east to west from the pyramid to the Sphinx. However, this doesn't necessarily mean it's not part of the fissure, because if you look at the fissure from the chamber, looking at it, you see it sloping down and to the left, which means as it gets deeper, it goes further south, and as it gets higher up, it goes further north. So it could be slanting down towards where this tunnel is carved out. But we're not sure about this. I don't know that the lower tunnel was part of the same fissure. That's just a working theory I've got going for the moment. So when we add Beyondi's scan to this image, we can see the general location of all these lower chambers down here. We can see at least 4 or 5 of them descending down to where it reaches this level where everything's connected. So we don't know exactly what those chambers look like, but I roughly sketched them in here with some sort of shaft connecting them all together or individual shafts between each one. So that's not an exact replica, of course. That's a general just sketch to show that there are chambers there. And then if we look back up and add the satellite image on top, we can see where all these other shafts are coming down. So I've kind of sketched these shafts into place as well. And we know that they're all full of sand, so they all descend to unknown depths. That's not to say none of these have been explored and mapped out, but generally speaking today, we don't know how deep any of them are, because as we know with Campbell's tomb, which is over in this direction, right behind the Sphinx, that one was only 20 meters deep when it was excavated in the 1830s by Campbell and Colonel Howard Weiss. However, we know from Filippo's scan that that shaft actually goes down about 1,200 meters according to his images. So that means the floor that was found was a false floor. So any one of these could have a false floor, even if they've been explored and excavated in the past. So we don't know how deep these go down or to what chambers they connect into, but any of them could be connected to Dobecki's tunnel or to these lower chambers. When you get down to this lowest level, you can tell that there's much more going on and lateral connections to some of the other shafts coming down. When we're looking from this angle, looking basically south over the plateau, we can also match up this scan from the Khafre project that goes basically all the way along the Sphinx Causeway, lining up the front of the Sphinx Temple and the western end of the Khafre Pyramid. We can put this image basically in place. It looks like about this. These are all these tubes going very deep down under the Khafre Pyramid as they've showed us, and also all along the causeway. So it's coming all the way over to around here where the Osiris Shaft is. Maybe some of this is the Osiris Shaft. It may not be perfectly aligned, but I did my best here. And if we remember, Bill Brown and Dr. Abbas had also scanned this area. And if I flip this image, reverse it left to right, then we can throw it on the same satellite image and see that even in the GPR scans, you still see some of these shafts and tube-looking structures vertically oriented going straight down under the causeway. So this is not to mention that Ben van Kerkwijk and Yusuf Awiyan have brought attention to these holes that are along the causeway as well around this area especially. There's several of them that I've found myself where you can push the sand into the holes and the sand continuously keeps dropping down in through these cracks, which indicates something underneath that is so huge that after thousands of years of sand blowing in, it's still not full. So this is another clue that tells us there's something huge underneath this causeway, something that goes down so deep it would blow our minds. At one point, I did actually bring my endoscope and stick it down into these holes, and I can show you some of the images. We didn't break through into any major chambers underneath, but I did see some views of some interesting things. You will notice there are 3 shafts directly on the causeway itself. So why have none of these shafts been excavated already in modern times with GPR equipment so we can scan the floors of them? And it will almost guarantee that we will connect into chambers and tunnels that also connect from the Sphinx to the Menkaure Pyramid and the Great Pyramid. There have been reports from the actual Giza director who said himself there was a tunnel from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid, and I've put out a lot more evidence in the past that shows that to be the case. So once we finish clearing all the sand out of these shafts along the Sphinx Causeway, then we can move on to the hundreds of shafts in the Southern Cemetery, the Eastern Cemetery, and the massive Western Cemetery. You can see how many shafts there are in each one of these areas along the southern end of the Great Pyramid as well. There are shafts everywhere, and you can see not even half of them because they're too small. Here you can see in the Western Cemetery, every single one of these mastabas has at least one shaft in it, and these are all huge shafts that you can see. What you can't see from this distance is that there are millions of little shafts all throughout, which are much smaller, maybe around like 3 or 4 feet across, as opposed to these huge ones you can see, which are more like 6 to 8 feet across, each one of them. So this is very interesting. Over this way is where we have the second Sphinx location and over to NC2. But this right here is the area where the Japanese are currently excavating. And as I've shown in other videos, they are actually dumping sand from this area into these shafts and filling these ones in. You can see that right here. I have an image from 2023 when you can see that all of these shafts are empty and open right here. And this is the area where the Japanese excavated. So let's look at 2024. They uncovered all of this and the shafts are still open and empty. But then when we get to 2025, we see that they've uncovered a huge area here, and all these shafts are now full of the sand that they pulled out of here. So you can look on Google Earth yourself and confirm these shafts have all been filled in since the Japanese have been working here. So this is backwards. We're trying to excavate the sand out of these shafts and actually see where they lead, whereas the team that's working there now is actually filling them in. And I'm sure they are uncovering some very important stuff over here, but still, we should be taking that sand out of the plateau, not dumping it into these shafts. So now that we've gone through all of this footage, gone through all the stills, gone through all the potential discoveries and potential continuing passageways, let's talk about the most exciting part, which is what can actually be done? What projects can we submit permits for? What should we push for? Well, for one thing, we have to think about muography. This is the main technique that the Scan Pyramids team has been using on the Great Pyramid. They were working on the Khafre Pyramid a long time ago in 1968, actually, using muography. And muons are these cosmic particles that come flying through even solid matter, but they move through solid matter differently than empty voids. So this is how they've been trying to detect these extra cavities within the Great Pyramid, for instance. And they basically put these plates into any locations as deep as they can get, and these plates are sensors that collect the data on how these muons are moving through the structure. This is only helpful if you have a location deep underground to place these sensor plates, because you can never measure anything deeper than where you can put the sensor plates, only above it. However, in the Osiris Shaft, obviously, we could put some plates down pretty low and we could scan upwards. So we have many different areas that we could actually scan from the Osiris Shaft using muon scanning. And this shows kind of the idea of what I'm talking about. We could actually get those sensors into the mud tunnel, and we have all this range here. We can put them in the second level and the first level, and if we get into Dobecki's tunnel, we could do the entire area. And how much would this show us about all of these surrounding shafts and all their chambers that are connected in? Each one of these may be exactly like the Osiris Shaft. It may have many different levels of chambers, and from these lower areas, muon scans could actually help us determine where these other chambers are. If we could get even deeper down to these lowest chambers that Biondi is showing us, then we could scan even more. So how much would just muon scans tell us about all these other structures in the area? It would tell us quite a bit. Here I've shown all the points that I believe could have potential access to chambers beyond the Osiris Shaft. So this is what we should do. First, we should delicately clean and clear every area in the already known structure. We should do a full photogrammetry model, including under the water, so that we have a complete model that academics and independent researchers can all inspect themselves, look at every surface, and that way many more of us can be figuring out what's going on down there rather than just the people who have private access to get in. We should drain the water as low as we can, just like Zahi did in his first excavation. And while the water is low, we should uncover the rock pile, which is potentially right here in the floor. The one that Boris Said told us could have a continuing tunnel beneath it, leading to many additional chambers. We should see if that's there. That's easy. We should use GPR and every form of remote sensing we have on every single surface. So I'm talking about the floors, the ceilings, the walls, every surface we have, we should GPR that and do other types of remote sensing as well. Find any voids that are anywhere near the entire structure. There's no reason not to do that. Again, it's completely non-invasive and very insightful technology. We should raise the sarcophagus and look below it. There could be a shaft going straight down from underneath that sarcophagus. Why not? We should figure out if there is or not. We should explore the fissure with an endoscope or just dropping a weighted camera down into it. A waterproof one would be smartest. We can drop it down through here and inspect if this fissure does connect to Dobecki's tunnel or any other structures below it. We can also go up above if we have an endoscope. We should excavate the mud from the floor in the mud tunnel because, for instance, right here, this whole section of the fissure, we can't see it at all. This is all filled in with mud. It's a dirt floor that you have to crawl over, but obviously it's filling in the fissure below it. We should also excavate the mud from the secondary tunnel blockage just here. We know that that could continue on further as well if the dirt was pulled out of there. We should excavate the mud from the moat floor all around the island, the entire floor underwater. We should clear out all of the mud down there and we should go through it with a fine-tooth comb, find every artifact, analyze every bone, fragment, everything we find. Then we should excavate the sand from all the shafts to the east and west. All these ones up top, they're just full of sand. There's absolutely no reason not to clear that sand out of there. And we'd be almost guaranteed to find so many new chambers that likely connect in. If these potential blocks that I noticed in the mud tunnel ceiling just here are actually the floor of a chamber, then I would bet either this shaft, or this shaft probably connects straight down to it, and we can access it from above just by pulling the sand out of these shafts. And there's no reason not to. Removing sand does not hurt anything. So all of these shafts should be cleared of sand, and there are many, many more all around that area if we had a wider view. And then finally, perhaps most importantly, we can access Dobecki's tunnel from either the Sphinx or Campbell's tomb, which is right behind the Sphinx, just a little past here, or from the other end from the Khafre Pyramid, G2. So Dobecki's tunnel, he told us it connects all the way between the two, from the Khafre Pyramid to the Sphinx. So we could access it from either end. This image actually shows what that could mean. Basically, Dobecki's tunnel could be the master tunnel that connects them all. Khafre's pyramid substructure to the Osiris Shaft substructure to the Campbell's tomb substructure and straight to the Sphinx substructure. This is the Sphinx right above here. So this is the shaft coming down. So all four of these major chambers that were showing up in the Khafre Research Project scans using the SAR Doppler tomography, all of them seem to be connected, at least potentially, by Dobecki's tunnel. So this is the tunnel we need to get into. You know, this connects everything together. And in some of my other films, I've shown that past the Sphinx, it also goes further to the east, where I am guessing some of these record chambers are. Based on a lot of evidence, based on the Casey readings, based on the Casey Foundation's own interpretations of the Casey readings, and so much more. So that's also very similar to what we see at the Great Pyramid, and this one's reversed. The pyramid's on the right instead. You can also see again that underneath the causeway from the Great Pyramid, there's also one of these tunnels that comes in from underneath and accesses, again, some of the most important chambers we could ever hope to access. So we've got this tunnel on the Great Pyramid, and we've got this tunnel going to Khafre's Pyramid and the Sphinx. So now we've seen many different details of this situation, but if we kind of zoom back the camera and just look from a very broad approach, even on the most fundamental level, Osiris is the god of the underworld. The Osiris Shaft, or the Tomb of Osiris, would therefore very likely be an access point into that underworld. On the most fundamental level, it makes absolute sense. We might remember the great Abdel Hakim Awiyan often referred to Lower Egypt and all the pyramid areas as the land of Osiris. And I think this is an appropriate name because these tunnels under Giza, they don't just connect all the pyramids of Giza, they also connect out to Abu Rawash, to Zawiya al-Aryan, down to Saqqara and Dashur, and even over to Upper Egypt as well. This is a vast tunnel network, and the underworld is the domain of Osiris. I don't think Zahi's wrong to associate this structure with Osiris because, like I've shown, it does have a similar motif to the Osirian and other Osirian-type structures. So, on the most fundamental level, it just makes sense that this is going to be an access point to the deepest areas of Giza. And that's not even to mention that a statue of Osiris or pieces of one was actually discovered on the south side of the Great Sphinx itself. And it was placed potentially on top of this little platform that may have been right on top of this vertical shaft going down and connecting to these temples and tunnels as well. So I mentioned that a bit in my last film, The Pyramid of Records, but all of it is leading us to understand this connection between Osiris and the Duat, the afterlife or the underworld, spoken of metaphysically, but also represented physically as structures under the Giza Plateau, which is also called the Giza Necropolis, because it's all this metaphor of the afterlife, death, the place where the sun goes after it sets behind the horizon. This is the journey of Osiris and the realm of Osiris. So if you want to learn more about the Osiris Shaft, there are endless reference links in the description below. So one final note, I will be returning to the Osiris Shaft on January 19th, 2027, and you are welcome to join me. That will be the first day of the Hall of Records tour, which I'm co-hosting with my good friend, Dr. Manu Safezadeh, author of the amazing book Under the Sphinx, where he analyzes all the actual hieroglyphic evidence and everything that the Egyptians themselves told us about some of the earliest knowledge of their culture. This is one of the greatest books to come out about Giza in the last few decades. It's incredibly well researched, and Manu's done so much work aside from this also. That's why I reference him in nearly every video. But this tour is the first tour he has ever offered to the world. So this is a major, major once in a lifetime experience, basically. So you can go to archaeologicalrescue.org/Egypt tour to see the page I'm showing you right now. The main tour is going to be January 19th through February 1st, 2027. And then February 1st through 4th, we're going to have the Fayum and Amarna add-on option. And the Osiris Shaft is also going to be an add-on option January 19th. Our official Egyptian guide will, of course, be Mohammed Ibrahim, but actually we have two official Egyptian guides, as Ahmed Nadi will also be joining us. He was there last year, and it was really great to meet him. He brought so much great information to the tour as well. So you got not one, but two official Egyptian guides. And then just everything. You know, if you come on the main tour, we're going to start with Saqqara. Amazing day at Saqqara, the Serapeum, Joseph's Pyramid, you know, and then the Sound Healing Hospital, plus a private visit to the Southern Tomb. The South Tomb at Saqqara, I've never even been there. I have never been in there. It's very, very rare to get an opportunity to go into the South Tomb. And it's very much like the huge, massive chamber that's inside the step pyramid of Djoser as well. It's very similar. It's like it's mirroring it in some ways. So that's going to be an amazing opportunity. Of course, we're going to be visiting the Sphinx right between its paws. We're going to get the private entrance to the Sphinx enclosure, but we're also going into the Sphinx temple this time, which is again an extremely rare opportunity. Almost no one has ever put this on their tour before. When I went into the Sphinx Temple with Muhammad and Dr. Robert Schoch back in 2019, it was the first time Dr. Schoch had been in that temple since 1992, recording Mystery of the Sphinx. So people don't go in there. They don't think it's as important, and they'd rather just get the private entrances to the other places. But you can never see inside the Sphinx Temple without paying that private visit. So we're going to the Old Cairo Museum as well as the Gem. We're going to get the Nile Cruise in Luxor, Colossi of Memnon, the West Bank, the Valley of the Kings. We're going to have a great time at Edfu because Manu is one of the first people to ever translate what's called the Edfu building text, the inscriptions on the wall there, which are actually telling us the story of Atlantis. So if you want to see the story of Atlantis written on an Egyptian temple wall with the first human being to ever create a very highly accurate English translation of it, this is the place to go. We'll be seeing the Stargate symbol all over the place. Muhammad's going to be pointing this out at every single temple. At Edfu as well, you see the Saba Stargate. And then coming back to Cairo, we'll get our private visit to the Great Pyramid, of course. And if you're not done at that point, we've got Fayum and Minya add-on. So Minya, otherwise known as Amarna, in ancient times was the central capital city of Akhenaten. And yes, we are going to have Louis de Cordier with us when we visit the Hawara Labyrinth. the man who has been working for 2 decades now fighting to get a project to happen to protect the Hawara Labyrinth that I've been covering extensively for many years. The Fayum Oasis, we're going to go to the Meidum, Hawara, and Lahun pyramids. All three of these are really important. Then in the Minya district, we're going to be going to Beni Hassan, this incredible site where you have these enormous chambers carved into the cliffside. And Tel El Amarna, the capital city of Akhenaten, where we can see many more cliff tombs and a lot of temple ruins. And Tuna Gebel, which is an underground city with over 1,000 tunnels. So we're going to be able to go inside some of those tunnels. There's a few that are open, but the guards on site there have told me directly there's over 1,010 tunnels, actually. So this is amazing stuff that also is never really included in tours. Manu's going to be with us for the extension too, and he's going to be sharing more about the secret records from the early ages. That's going to be the whole tour. Then everyone departs on the 4th. Come check it out if you're interested in that, and I hope you can join us. So in conclusion, these are some of the most important leads we should be following. These are all the entrances we should be investigating. Every single one of these projects I'm proposing is completely non-invasive. It cannot hurt anything. We're talking about removing sand, removing mud, doing GPR scans. None of this could possibly hurt anyone, but it could very likely lead to some of the most important chambers and structures and even records that we have ever found under Giza. It's almost sure to lead to things like this. As Manu said, Osiris is associated with these words of creation, with these halls of records. So these are the most important leads we should follow at Giza. I know this has been a really long video, so I thank you for watching. And I'm just going to leave it off by saying that if you're interested in helping support projects like this, please check out archaeologicalrescue.org, where the Archaeological Rescue Foundation is proposing all types of projects that could lead us to these record chambers, could lead us to these most ancient artifacts on the planet, and could lead us to answers about who we are, where we came from, and who were the very first civilizations, who were the builders of Giza. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye.